Welcome to the Harris County Flood Control District's virtual community engagement meeting to discuss the TC Jester Stormwater Detention Basin. This virtual community meeting is being offered by the Flood Control District to share vital information with the community. My name is Sparkle Bell, and I'm with the Flood Control District Communications team. I'm joined tonight by a team of Flood Control District leadership and subject matter experts to ensure we continue to keep you up to date on these important flood mitigation projects in your community. We are also joined by staff from area elected officials' offices and community associations. We are so glad to see you all engaged in these projects, and we look forward to continuing to share updates and keeping you all in the community involved. At this time, we'll begin tonight's meeting with remarks from Precinct 4 Commissioner Jack Cagle.
Good evening. I'm Jack Cagle, your Harris County Commissioner for Precinct 4. I thank the hardworking and highly skilled team at the Harris County Flood Control District for their tireless efforts to protect the citizens of Harris County from the threats of future flooding. And I thank you for taking some time out of your evening to participate in this meeting. Your continued input and involvement will ensure our community remains strong and healthy. The matters discussed this evening will focus on the TC Jester Stormwater Detention Basin project, which will provide your homes and businesses protection from stormwater in the Cypress Creek watershed. These improvements will help preserve our way of life and continue to make this community a wonderful place to work, play, and raise our families. Your engagement tonight comprises a crucial part of the successful operations of Harris County Flood Control District's program plans. We all thank you. Good evening.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Cagle. This virtual public meeting will begin with a presentation to share project updates, including the results of preliminary engineering analysis, the recommended stormwater detention basin alternative, and next steps. The presentation will be followed by a virtual question and answer session with Flood Control District team members. Attendees will be able to submit comments and questions through the website or via phone. Any comments not addressed during tonight's Q&A session will receive a response from the Flood Control District following the public comment period. Instructions on how to participate in this virtual open house are included on this slide, on the virtual meeting webpage, and on the Flood Control District website. I will also share a reminder of these instructions when we reach the Q&A portion of the meeting. We will now transition to Marcus Steckett, Director of Engineering with the Flood Control District, who will share information about the Flood Control District and this project. Marcus, over to you.
Thank you, Sparkle, and a special thank you to each of you for joining us tonight. In this presentation, we'll give you a brief overview of the project specifics, but before we get into that, we want to share some information about the Flood Control District. The Harris County Flood Control District, we are a special purpose district created by Texas legislature in 1937, and we were created in response to floods that devastated the Houston area in 1929 and 1935. The Flood Control District was created to serve as a local partner to leverage federal funding for flood damage reduction. Our mission has greatly expanded over 80 years with billions of dollars of infrastructure improvements in the ground. And while we are a separate entity from Harris County, the Harris County Commissioners Court served as our governing body. The mission of the Harris County Flood Control District is to provide flood damage reduction projects that work with appropriate regard for community and natural values. One of the most difficult challenges we face is constructing effective projects that are sensitive to community and natural values in highly urbanized areas. Harris County includes 22 main watersheds, totaling approximately 1,800 square miles and more than 2,500 linear miles of channel. 2,500 miles is approximately the distance from New York to California. A watershed is a geographical region of land that drains to a channel or an outlet. Each watershed has its own unique characteristics and needs. The project we're presenting tonight is in the Cypress Creek watershed. Our area is flood prone, and here are some reasons why. We experience extreme rainfalls, including tropical storms and hurricanes. We have flat, slow draining topography, and we have clay soils that do not easily soak up excess rainfall. The Flood Control District works with other agencies to share jurisdiction over flooding issues in Harris County. This slide illustrates that shared jurisdiction. Inside the neighborhoods, as shown on the left side of this illustration, storm sewers and roadside ditches collect stormwater runoff and start the process of moving it away from streets and homes. Storm sewers and roadside ditches are the responsibility of the underlying municipality and Harris County Engineering in unincorporated parts of the county. The larger bayous and channels that take the collected stormwater and move it through our drainage system to Galveston Bay are the responsibility of the Flood Control District. This is shown on the right side of the illustration. And in the middle is a stormwater detention basin, sometimes constructed by the Flood Control District. When storm sewers are increased, this increases runoff. Since it is our policy to avoid impacts to downstream properties, detention basins help to safely take in and temporarily store excess stormwater during heavy rain events. Often, we partner with Harris County precincts, utility districts, and others to add recreational amenities such as trails to these basins and along our channels. On August 25th, 2018, Harris County voters approved $2.5 billion for flood risk reduction projects. This vote followed a series of meetings across Harris County in each watershed, which resulted in a list of what is now 181 bond projects. 160 of those 181 bond projects have been initiated so far, including 12 projects in the Cypress Creek watershed. A total of more than $1.2 billion in funding has been secured so far to stretch this bond program even further. The actual timing of each individual project would depend on a variety of factors, including environmental permitting, right-of-way acquisition, and utility relocations, and in some cases, requirements of a particular grant. That said, projects lists and project schedules will be updated regularly on our website. While the bond was for $2.5 billion, the full cost to construct every project in the bond table is almost $5 billion. So we made it clear from the outset that we would need partner funding to fully construct the projects in the bond program. And as I mentioned previously, we've had some success with obtaining $1.2 billion in partner funds. As this graphic illustrates, it shows the many sources of partnership funding, including federal, state, and local funding the Harris County Flood Control District is working to secure for Harris County. Each agency has its own definition of eligible projects and its own requirements for local match funding. So the Flood Control District is working diligently to match projects to the right partnership opportunities. We'll now move into the part of the program that's specific to the Cypress Creek watershed and TC Jester Stormwater Detention Basin. As with much of our region, this watershed has historically experienced storm events that produce heavy rains and cause frequent flooding. Most recently, as you may remember, flooding of Hurricane Harvey in August 2017. In the Cypress Creek watershed, the 4-day Harvey rainfall total was 29.3 inches, which resulted in record flooding along Cypress Creek and many of its tributaries. The Cypress Creek watershed is also one of the most highly developed in the county, and much of that development occurred before regulations around on-site stormwater detention were in place. This creates a unique challenge when proposing flood risk reduction projects in the area. A regional study for Cypress Creek watershed found flooding along tributaries of Cypress Creek is predominantly caused by the rising of Cypress Creek and backing up into those tributaries, not the lack of sufficient stormwater conveyance or drainage capacity by a tributary themselves. Therefore, the study recommended nearly 25,000 acre-feet of additional stormwater detention in the watershed to reduce that backwater issue. We're often asked, why don't we simply enlarge Cypress Creek itself? The answer is complicated, but basically it's because it's a federally protected natural stream. Widening or deepening it would be very expensive for multiple reasons and would require buying out and demolishing homes and businesses all along the creek, which is very disruptive for the community. I'll pause for a moment to talk a little bit about the multiple flood risk reduction tools we have in our toolbox. This slide shows the various techniques we can deploy to reduce risk of flooding in a particular area. It's important to find the right type and right configuration for each project and each area, which we do in the feasibility stage. On this slide, you'll see several of our typical tools, but tonight we'll focus on the second item in the toolbox, a stormwater detention basin. Because the previously mentioned study recommends 25,000 acre-feet of detention, we're primarily focused on constructing stormwater detention in the Cypress Creek watershed. Of course, being such a developed watershed, we also acquire right-of-way wherever we can along the creek to preserve and restore natural floodplains or for future projects. The Cypress Creek watershed has its own bond ID for right-of-way acquisition. A stormwater detention basin is built to store excess stormwater until it can safely make its way back into the channel and then ultimately to Galveston Bay. There are several ways of stormwater that will fill the basin, but all of our structures are passive designs that utilize gravity to operate, so there are no mechanical pumps or gates. This illustration is showing stormwater overflowing into the basin from a bayou by way of a weir structure. As the water level in the bayou recedes, the stormwater from the basin flows by gravity through an outfall pipe and then back into the channel. The flood control district typically constructs two types of basins, wet bottom and dry bottom. Both wet and dry bottom fill up during heavy rain events and then drain out as the receiving channel recedes. The difference is that one has a permanent pool and the other one has a dry, grassy bottom. A wet bottom, which is what we're recommending for this project, typically has a permanent pool of water and can provide habitat for a variety of wildlife. So sometimes we're asked, how can a basin full of water hold more water? The answer is that the basin is not full. The basin is excavated down to a natural water table, which provides that permanent pool. The space storing the stormwater is above the natural water table up to the top of bank of the basin. A dry bottom basin, on the other hand, will fill up during a heavy rain event and then completely drain out once the storm has passed. It provides an opportunity for recreational amenities such as sports fields, parks to be built by others. We know no single project or detention can meet the 25,000 acre-feet recommendation. So the flood control district is taking a watershed-wide approach to executing flood risk reduction projects in the Cypress Creek watershed. The Cypress Creek Implementation Program provides a holistic view of activity in the watershed and enables the flood control district to deliver projects strategically and efficiently in this heavily developed area. Projects will include stormwater detention basin, channel improvements along various Cypress Creek tributaries, and right-of-way acquisition for floodplain preservation or for future projects. To move projects quickly and efficiently, the flood control district is moving forward wherever possible, beginning with efforts around and on land that we already own. We hope to share more information on the implementation report sometime this summer. The report will lay out the prioritization of projects and the next steps in the watershed. Now we can turn to the specifics of the projects that we're here to discuss tonight. As I previously mentioned, as part of our approach to the Cypress Creek watershed, the flood control district is prioritizing projects on property it owns, which is the case here. The flood control district owns approximately 171 acres of land at TC Jester and Cypress Creek, south of Cypress Wood Drive. The flood control district purchased this property to preserve it from future development. Funds from the 2018 bond program allowed us to begin the project life cycle. The efforts on this site are split into two projects, one west of TC Jester Boulevard and one east of TC Jester Boulevard. The property west of TC Jester Boulevard is currently under an excavation and removal contract, which allows a contractor to dig up soil for their own use. This is a low-cost contract to the flood control district, and as of today, the contractor has excavated approximately 1,600 cubic yards of soil. Tonight, we're discussing the approach for the east side of TC Jester. In May 2020, following Harris County Commissioner's Court approval of an agreement with an engineering consultant, the flood control district initiated a preliminary engineering stage for this section of its property. During this stage, engineers examined and modeled alternatives for stormwater detention basins. These alternatives are balanced balance needed stormwater detention with a myriad of other concerns such as environmental regulations, conflicts with pipelines and other utilities, and community values. At the end of this stage, the project team will produce a preliminary engineering report that will include 3 alternatives for a stormwater detention basin and a recommendation of the most beneficial alternative. As this project moves forward, we've been in close contact and coordination with local groups and will continue to keep the community feedback in mind as we progress through the project lifecycle. I will now present the 3 alternatives for the stormwater detention basin, how it could be designed and how it could look. Alternative 1 is the largest stormwater detention basin out of the 3 alternatives with about 1,070 acre-feet of provided detention. There are 2 compartments to this basin, a larger one on the north side of Cypress Creek and a smaller one on the south side. This basin will have a 50-foot buffer from Cypress Wood Drive and a 200-foot buffer from TC Jester Boulevard and Cypress Creek. Buffers maintain the natural wooded appearance of the property. The buffer along Cypress Creek provides an important riparian zone that reduces erosion and enhances habitat. There are 3 petrochemical pipelines on the property, and to maximize detention, those pipelines would need to be relocated. The estimated cost for this alternative is approximately $38 million. Alternative 2 holds a small amount of stormwater detention with about 930 acre-feet of storage. Because of its minimal impacts to the existing pipelines and the wetlands on site. When the Flood Control District constructs projects across our region, we often obtain permits to move pipelines or impact wetlands, which can add additional time and expense to our efforts. The pipeline bisects the main basin, creating 2 separate compartments on the north side of the creek, along with the same 3rd compartment on the south side of the creek. This alternative has the same tree buffer from Cypress Wood Drive, TC Jester Boulevard, and Cypress Creek as alternative 1, and the estimated cost is $30.1 million. And finally, alternative 3. This alternative has the least amount of stormwater detention basin, holding about 630 acre-feet of stormwater. Like alternative 2, this minimizes its impact to the on-site pipelines and wetlands. Rather than a 200-foot buffer from Cypress Creek, this alternative has a 400-foot tree buffer from the creek. While this buffer reduces the potential risk reduction benefits of the basin, it provides additional opportunities for trails and other recreational amenities built by a 3rd-party sponsor. The estimated cost for this alternative is $21.1 million. The previous studies stated that Cypress Creek needs 25,000 acre-feet of stormwater detention. For a point of reference, the Flood Control District would need to build about 40 similarly sized basins as alternative 3. Based on the analysis of potential benefits and flood damage reduction risk benefits, estimated cost, and other considerations, alternative 2 is the recommended alternative for this project. This alternative would remove 43 structures from the area of inundation during a 500-year storm event. Those 43 structures are valued at $29.6 million, giving this alternative the highest benefit cost ratio, or the value of structures divided by the construction cost. As previously mentioned, the recommended alternative would hold 930 acre-feet of stormwater. To give you an idea of about how much 930 acre-feet of stormwater is, a standard football field is about an acre in size. Now think of that football field covered with 1 foot of standing water. That volume is 1 acre-foot. 1 acre-foot is approximately 326,000 gallons of water. Therefore, we expect approximately 303 million gallons of stormwater within the proposed TC Jester Stormwater Detention Basin with the alternative 2 design. We know that this property is of high interest to walkers and bikers. Our agency does not build nor maintain trails or other recreational amenities, but we often partner with other agencies that do in order to make the site multi-purpose. The Flood Control District's mission is to provide flood damage reduction projects that work with appropriate regard for community and natural values. This property will first and foremost be used for flood mitigation. Any recreational amenities or trails will have to accommodate the detention for the basin. Let's take a look at the next step for the project lifecycle and the outlook for this project. First, I'll talk about our project lifecycle. The lifecycle of an individual project starts at a feasibility study. Once we secure funding, the project is more developed during the PER stage, which is where we are now. During this stage, any environmental clearance must be obtained. We then acquire any needed right-of-way and work through utility relocations if needed. The final three stages are design, construction, and operations and maintenance. Throughout each project's life cycle, we will continue to solicit community input and secure funding opportunities to make these projects a reality. As noted on the slide, we are currently in the preliminary engineering stage of the project life cycle. Comments from this meeting will be considered and incorporated into the preliminary engineering report for this project as appropriate. In the next few months, the preliminary engineering report will be completed and sent to Harris County Commissioners Court for their approval. Once the preliminary engineering report is approved, the project will move into final design, which will take about a year. Once funding is obtained, construction will begin. This could be no earlier than late 2022, pending funding. This project is funded through the design stage, which is, as we mentioned, is likely to be about a year. We're looking at all available opportunities for funding the construction stage of this effort, including partnership opportunities. And as you may know, last fall, we included this project in an application for grant funding through the Texas General Land Office, or the GLO. During that process, we held a community meeting to discuss the application process and truly appreciated the community's participation in the event. Unfortunately, the GLO did not award any funding to Harris County during that process. That said, there's still substantive and critical work that could be done before the project can move into construction. We are focused on completing the PR and the design for this project, and we'll continue to aggressively pursue funding opportunities as the project lifecycle moves forward. Now I will turn it back over to Sparkle to start the Q&A.
Thanks, Marcus. Before we move into the question and answer portion of this meeting, I'd like to share a quick reminder that we'd love to hear from you on this and other projects moving forward across Harris County. To learn more about this project, ask questions, or to sign up for our mailing list, please visit hcfcd.org/TC-Jester. As a reminder, there are 3 ways to submit a comment about this project during tonight's session. You can submit a comment on this site in the box near the presentation live stream. You can submit a comment on the Flood Control District's website at hcfcd.org/TC-Jester, or you can submit a comment via phone at 855-925-2801 using the meeting code 9358. If you're joining us via phone tonight, please press *6 to leave a message. Additionally, I want to reiterate that any questions not addressed during tonight's session will receive a response from the Flood Control District following the public comment period, which for this project runs through June 30th. Information from this meeting and a recording of the live stream will be available on the Flood Control District's website and YouTube channel. Joining Marcus for our question and answer session tonight is Tawana Cooper, who oversees the Capital Projects Department North for the Flood Control District. Now it's time to take some of your questions. And this first question is for you, Marcus. Mia wants to know what measures are embedded to ensure the stormwater accumulation does not break or overflow and create enhanced jeopardy to nearby communities.
Yes, thanks for that question. So I think what's being described is taking the site or taking the banks of the basin and raising them, which would create a dam situation, which opens it up for a breakage and potential impacts to others downstream. However, for this basin is not being built up. So this basin is taking the ground that exists out there today and going down. So every cubic yard of dirt that we pull out of there is a cubic yard of dirt that's out of Cypress Creek and out of someone's home. So this one doesn't create a dam situation just because we're not building up the basin itself higher than natural ground.
All right, thank you for that. And our next question is for you, Marcus, as well, and it's from Mr. Adamok, who asked, with the cost of detention sites going up, why don't we just dig each basin twice as deep?
Yeah, and also another good question. And the main reason is at some point you hit what's referred to as a natural water table. So as you tend to dig deeper in the basin, regardless of how deep you dig it, because there's a standard water level that's there, that water will always exist. So you just end up spending additional funding without getting that flood damage reduction benefit that the flood control district tries to gain by constructing our projects.
All right, and Marcus, you're popular tonight. One more for you. It's from Brooke and Glenn. They were among several asking about the funding for construction of this project and what's the status of funding for design and construction. I know you touched on it in your presentation, but if you share that information with us once more, it'd be greatly appreciated.
Yes, so as I mentioned in the presentation, this project is funded using bond funds through the preliminary engineering stage, which is where we are now, and through the design stage. The intent from the beginning for this project was to use the partnership funding that we expected through submitting applications to GLO for grants. But because that money never came through and we weren't awarded any funds, we're going to take it to design, which can continue to move forward because it's going to take several years, and we get another chance to submit, potentially submit more applications and get more funding. So the plan now is to do what we can with what we have and get it to a shovel-ready project. So that's where we take it to design. We get the engineer to finish it up, sign and seal it. And then from that point, all we're doing is it's sitting there waiting for us to get the money for funding, and then we can go into the bid process.
All right, thank you so much for that. Tawana, this next question is for you. Tom and Linda are interested in paddling on Cypress Creek. They want to know how this project will impact the ability to paddle on the creek, how it will change the creek in the area for paddling, and what provisions will be made to support and maintain paddling access. Mr. Douglas specifically asked about a canoe launch on the South Bank.
Yes, thank you for the question. There is a canoe launch on the South Bank right at TC Jester, and the preliminary engineering report that Marcus just presented includes 3 alternatives for stormwater detention basin. Each one of those alternatives does include a 200-foot vegetative buffer along TC Jester, and currently we have no plans on impacting the existing canoe launch, and we're planning on maintaining a tree buffer. Now, our core mission, of course, is to build flood damage reduction projects that work and have appropriate regard for community and natural values. So in doing so, we also take into consideration others who might want to partner concerning any amenities, such as additional launches or anything that's going on with the canoes.
All right, thank you for that information. We always have those interested in recreation, so we understand you had that question, and I'm glad you can provide some insight. All right, Marcus, would you please provide another overview of the comparison of the 3 alternatives, the cost and the structures?
Sure. So alternative 1, we're looking at approximately 1,070 acre feet, and it'll be split into 2 connected compartments. And the estimated cost for that is $38 million. This is our largest alternative that provides us with the most reduction and the most benefit. And we can move to alternative 2. Alternative 2 has slightly less volume with about 930 acre feet of detention. We were able to minimize costs for this one and other potential issues by just pretty much avoiding the pipelines and trying to avoid some of the wetlands that are shown here. If you're looking at this exhibit, those little purple blotches that you see on this exhibit, those are wetlands. And so by avoiding those, we don't have to pay wetland credits or anything like that to mitigate for it. Also, the split compartment there on the left and the right side of the pipeline there, we also don't have to pay the cost for moving or adjusting those pipelines. And so we were able to reduce the cost there to $30.1 million. And of course, the last option we looked at was the smallest, with about 640 acre feet of stormwater detention, and pretty much followed along the same concept, trying to avoid as much wetlands as we can. But we also removed the detention basin that was on the east side of the pipeline. And so the reduced cost there takes it to 21.1 million.
All right, thank you so much for that, Marcus. Our next question is from Grant, and he would like additional information on the estimated timelines for the start of construction on this project, which is east of TC Jester.
So estimated timeline, right now we're saying no later than 2022. So tonight we're here to present the alternatives that we have for preliminary engineering, gather your input, and then take that information to produce a final preliminary engineering report, which we will take to the Harris County Commissioners Court for approval. And then at that point, we can start the design stage. Right now, we're saying that design stage takes roughly about a year to get through design. It could be less. So right now, we're estimating that construction won't begin any later than 2022.
All right, Marcus, this next question is for you as well. Deborah would like to know if there's any property acquisition associated with this project.
There is no property acquisition associated with this project. All of the properties that we're working on, the one I mentioned previously, which is on the west side of TC Jester, is property that the Flood Control District owns, and the property on the east side is property that Flood Control District owns. And so what I want to clarify is when I mentioned the structures that were the 43 or so structures, what I was talking about there was those are the structures that benefit from the project. So by us incorporating the recommended alternative, it reduces the water surface elevation in the 500 years such that roughly 43 properties receive benefit. With that, we applied a cost of each one of those structures, that's to say if there was a flood damage and the home received 6 inches of water, then now the water surface elevation is reduced, let's say 6 inches, then those properties receive benefit from flooding, which normally, had we not put the project in place, those homes would have had to pay for some sort of damages, but that's how we came up with the benefit of those properties.
All right, thank you so much for that. Tawana, Jim has a question as to why we decided on a wet bottom basin layout instead of a dry stormwater detention basin.
Well, our goal for this project is to get as much stormwater detention volume as possible with the appropriate regards. And we can obtain more volume in a wet bottom basin than we can in the dry bottom basin. Also, a wet bottom basin does have certain water quality enhancement features that we can incorporate into the project, which will improve water quality downstream.
All right, thank you for that information. Marcus, why has this project taken so long to get started?
Based on the prioritization framework and when we talked with Commissioners Court, we came up with a certain time in which certain projects could be initiated, and this one just happened to be within that one of the more recent quartiles that we had that allowed us to be able to start the preliminary engineering report.
All right, our next question is for you, Tawana. Would this project take care of a Harvey-sized storm?
That's a very good question. And Marcus talked about the Harvey storm earlier, but for this particular project, we have mentioned earlier that our feasibility study indicated we need about 25,000 acre feet of stormwater detention in Cypress Creek. So this project alone would not take care of something like that. However, our goal in this project is to reduce water surface elevations in Cypress Creek, and we will reduce water surface elevations. In fact, the recommended alternative, which was alternative 2, would reduce water surface elevations at the 10-year storm by about 1.1 or 1.12 feet. Now, with consideration of what happened during Harvey, which was an anomaly as far as the amount of rain that fell within a short period of time, we recommend that everyone obtain flood insurance. So, because we cannot guarantee what will happen in the future with respect to rainfall.
All right, our next question is, will the current hurricane season delay this project? Marcus, can you address that one?
It's not expected that it will delay this project just because right now we're going into the new hurricane season and it lasts through October or so. We'll still be working on the design for the project, and majority of the efforts that we're doing right now, well, all of it, none of it is construction. There may be still some chance to go out there and gather data, but I don't expect that the hurricane season itself would significantly delay any of those efforts. Also, I just want to remind everyone that, we still haven't secured the funding for the project. So, even when we do make it through this hurricane season and going into the next and starting construction, that construction is really going to depend on whether or not we're able to secure funding to do the construction.
All right, thank you for that. At this time, I want to jump back and remind everyone that there are a couple of ways that you can submit a comment about this project or a question during tonight's session. You can submit a comment or question on this site in the box near the presentation live stream. You can also submit a comment on the Flood Control District's website at hcfcd.org/TC Jester, or you can submit a comment via phone at 855-925-2801 using the meeting code 9358. And again, if you're joining us via phone tonight, please press *6 to leave a message. All right, we're going to dive right back into the question. So there is a question as to why this meeting is being held remotely instead of in person. Obviously, the safety of our staff and the community at large is our top priority. And in an abundance of caution and in line with other city and county agencies, the Flood Control District continues to host virtual community engagement meetings due to health concerns related to COVID-19. We, of course, will continue to assess how and when to safely return to in-person meetings, and we look forward to seeing all of you when we do. All right, now our next question is, will the material that is already excavated west of TC Jester already provide stormwater detention? And Tawana, will you take that one?
Yes, sure. As Marcus mentioned earlier, the project on the west side of TC Jester is an excavation and removal contract where we have determined an approximate location for a future stormwater detention basin, and a contractor is working there, and that contractor is at liberty to remove as much of the soil from that area as they desire during a 3-year contract term. Now, as far as that area being excavated, any hole in the ground is a good hole in the ground. So it's not designed as a stormwater detention basin right now, but because there will be a hole in the ground, that could be considered some form of detention until we actually have a preliminary engineering report and a design for that side of TC Jester.
All right. Marcus, will you take this question? Will the basin reduce flooding risk upstream on Cypress Creek?
So saying upstream on Cypress Creek. So not sure how far the person that's asking that question lives upstream, but when I talk about upstream, I'm saying upstream, maybe a little bit upstream of TC Jester, but most of the benefits that will be recognized from this basin will be in the immediate vicinity of the alternative that's recommended. So if you live in this area, around TC Jester, kind of close over towards Strack, you'll see some benefit from this project.
All right, Tawana, will you take the next question? What will happen to the trails that are already on the site?
Okay, well, that's a very good question. So right now there are trails on the site. And of course, as we mentioned earlier, every project that the flood control district pursues has a balance where we're trying to obtain as much detention as possible. So we have to balance between the maximum flood mitigation and other elements that the community values. And as we said in the presentation, one of our biggest challenges is building projects in the developed areas. So the trails that are currently on site, those trails are not permitted, and there is no protection against or no protection given to trail users and to the flood control district from a liability perspective. So in other areas, there may be such situations, but we don't have any protection in that area. So the Flood Control District is working with the Greater Houston Off-Road Biking Association, as it has worked with other groups in the past, to formalize an agreement for use of Flood Control District owned land at this location, as well as throughout the county at other locations. Now, once the basin is complete, the Flood Control District may work with the Greater Houston Off-Road Biking Association to determine the best places for trails in the future. But our primary objective is stormwater detention on our property.
Thanks so much for providing that information, Tawana. Okay, will you also take this next question? How does the Flood Control District coordinate with utility providers to reduce impacts when projects are underway?
Okay, the Flood Control District begins taking into consideration utilities during the preliminary engineering phase, which is the phase that we're in right now. Now, once we have decided upon a recommended alternative and that alternative is accepted, we will begin during the design phase coordinating and reaching out to those utility owners to inform them about our project and to also gather information about their project and find out things such as what potential impacts our construction traffic might have on their particular pipelines and what type of protection is needed. And all of that information will be gathered during the design phase and taken into consideration in design of our stormwater detention basin so that we will not adversely impact their utilities. If their utilities need to be relocated, we will coordinate with them concerning that too. But that will generally start during the design phase after we have decided upon the recommended alternative and that has been approved.
All right, thank you so much. Marcus, this next question is for you. What are the benefits of a forested buffer on Cypress Creek?
So actually, there are a few. So one of the primary reasons for a buffer is to allow the area that runs along Cypress Creek, just because of the soil types, it's better to leave that vegetation that's already there, that's grown, that's thick, that holds the soil together. So if you start to move that out too quickly without doing some sort of improvements to the channel along the slopes of Cypress Creek, you run the risk of destabilizing what's already a stable zone. So we like to, depending on the situation, keep some of those riparian zones there, especially in natural channel areas like this. The other reason is, it still creates an opportunity for some third-party sponsor to put amenities and things like that, whether it's trails or mountain biking trails or walking trails, and just give it some use for some other use other than just a detention site for the community. And with the ones that are along TC Jester and Cypress Wood, it's a large enough buffer there to when you're passing by there, you don't see a big hole, or if you're walking along those trails that, would possibly be put in by a third party, no one knows it's there. So it's sort of like creates a nature walk, if any utility, not utilities, amenities or anything like that are placed on the site.
All right. Thank you for that, Marcus. Would you also take this? It seems like we're getting a lot of continued questions about how we make a decision between a dry bottom and a wet bottom and what factors go into that determination. Would you give us some additional context there?
So a large part of the decision for a wet bottom versus dry bottom goes into how much volume we need for the project. Whenever you're trying to get as much volume as you can, the first thing to do is to try to make it a wet bottom facility so you can get as much volume as you can. If this were a situation where we could do some sort of channel improvements and we didn't need 45,000 acre feet of detention, dry bottoms would tend to probably be the more route that we'd want to go in that situation, because it allows it to become used for a park or something like that by some other third party sponsor. But the other benefit of wet is it also creates some natural habitat. There's some environmental benefits to having a wet bottom basin there, and it also helps if again, if you have trails along that buffer, it kind of gives a natural feel to it to have those wetland plantings and things like that with the wet bottom, and it's you can also treat that as an aesthetic as well.
All right, thank you for that, Tawana. This next question is from Grant. He has a question as to who decides which alternative is best.
Thank you for that question, Grant. Our consulting engineer that did the preliminary engineering report evaluates various aspects of the project, existing conditions, and what our objectives are, and they recommend an alternative. And that recommendation takes several things into consideration. But one thing that was mentioned earlier was that they take into consideration the value or the cost of the structures and also the cost to build the project. We also take into consideration the environmental impacts on the project, and we take into consideration community values also. That is why you're seeing 3 alternatives for this project. Each alternative has a different focus. Alternative 1, the objective is to maximize detention volume on that one, but then there's a trade-off. When we do that, we're looking at a narrower buffer along Cypress Creek, but yet a 200-foot buffer along TC Jester and Cypress Wood. Alternative 2 reduces the environmental impacts, but the trade-off for that is less detention volume. And so does alternative 3. It also reduces the environmental impacts, but has even a smaller footprint for a basin, because that particular alternative includes a 400-foot riparian zone along Cypress Creek. So the engineer makes a recommendation based on the cost as well as what our objective is for the project and the value of the structures that are involved that will benefit from the project. Once they make that recommendation, we, the flood control district, evaluate what that recommendation is. And then we also take into consideration your input. And that's why we're having that meeting tonight. We're sharing with you that the recommended alternative is alternative number 2, but we want to hear from you because we also want to take your values into consideration for this project.
Thank you so much for that. I've seen some questions about if the presentation will be made available following this meeting. And I just want to reiterate once more that information from this meeting and a recording of the live stream will be available on the Flood Control District's website, following a website and YouTube channel. And that URL is now on your screen. So jot it down, hcfcd.org/TC-Jester. That is where you will be able to get a copy of this presentation or rewatch the presentation. It's one of the benefits of us being in a virtual environment. You can watch it back. Okay, this next question is from Claudette, and she is asking, why don't we focus on removing silt from Cypress Creek? So will you take that one?
Yes, Claudette, we have a project right now, we refer to it as the Major Maintenance Project for Cypress Creek. And that project will span approximately maybe 8 different phases. And currently we're focusing on some of the tributaries along Cypress Creek, but eventually that project will include some desiltation along Cypress Creek along the main stem. So the project is so large, it's basically a bond project that we're able to do as a result of the 2018 bond. But because it encompasses such a large area, we're having to do it in phases. And the phases we're in right now are focusing on the tributaries. We will be focusing on the main stem later on during the different phases of the project, which will include desiltation.
All right, thank you so much for that, Tawana. Our next question is from John. He wants to know if the flood control district's stated preference for gravity drainage design for stormwater detention basins due to certain details of the topography of Harris County are based on an effort to eliminate the possible failure points introduced with mechanical designs. That's a long question there. Tawana and/or Marcus, would you like to take that one?
Yes, I will. I will take that long question. Thanks, John. So yeah, our primary thing is to try to make sure that all basins that we do are gravity drained. And the primary reason is that, as you obviously stated, it's pumps. You have issues if they fail, then you always have to have someone available to go out and make sure that it's continuing to move, so that way it can continue to function. The same thing with the gate. You always have to have, you typically have to have someone go out there to make sure that the gate is opening as it should, the mechanical gates. And so, yeah, it's just one of the things where if we make sure that it's gravity and we put in our weirs at proper elevations, then the water comes in and it goes out, and it creates less of a risk of a clogging situation or some type of failure that could potentially make things worse.
All right, thank you so much for that. All right. Tawana, I think you wanted to provide some additional context to one of your earlier answers.
What was that?
On the PER?
Oh, okay. Well, if there are any concerns about what happens with the PER after tonight, what we're going to do is we're going to take into consideration the input that we get from you, the public, and we do appreciate you being here and participating tonight. And then we'll take that into consideration and work with the consulting engineer to find out if there are any adjustments that need to be made to the preliminary engineering report. And then if there are, those adjustments will be made. If the recommended alternative changes, we will reach back out to you and let you know what the final preliminary engineering report findings are. And after that is finalized, then we will pass the preliminary engineering report on throughout our process of getting it to Commissioners Court for approval. But you will hear from us before we do that.
Thank you so much. And I am noting that there are a lot of really specific questions that we are receiving. And obviously, this format doesn't allow for us to get into the specifics of your particular property or your particular issue in all cases. But I just want to reiterate that we will respond to all questions or comments received following the public comment period. So please do continue to submit those, and do know that we will respond to all questions asked. And then just another reminder that our presentation will be available after this meeting. All right, our next question is for Marcus. Jim asked if a phased construction approach had been considered.
So at this point, we're just trying to get through the preliminary engineering and design. Of course, when we initially started the project, assuming that we would receive some sort of grant funding, we assumed we would get funding for the entire project. But at this point, since we didn't get anything, we're trying to work through the preliminary engineering, get through the design, and it's going to be totally dependent upon funding for the project. If we can get full funding for the project, we'll construct it. If we get something less than the 30 some odd million that's estimated for the project, then we will go into a phased approach. And then at that time, we'll decide how much of the project we actually need to construct. But the goal is to try to completely fund the entire project.
All right, thank you for that. Marcus, I'd like for you to go back and talk a little bit about the funding of this project. I'm still seeing a few questions about funding, and I want to make sure that everyone has a clear understanding of where we are on that.
Yeah, so similar to Jim's, well, what I was explaining to Jim, this project it's funded through the preliminary engineering and through the design. The construction funding did not come through as we anticipated and as we hoped. So at this point, there's work that still needs to be done before we get to the construction phase. So right now we're doing that work, what we call the inside work, in hopes that, you know, over the course of the next, you know, year to year and a half, that we get the funding, we secure the funding so that we can do the construction project.
All right, thank you for that. Tawana, Kent has a question about where the weirs would be located.
The exact location of the weirs will be determined during the design phase. If we could pull up the exhibit, they may show some preliminary locations for outfalls. Can we go back to that page of the presentation?
Tawana, do you know what slide that is?
No, I really don't. So can we get back with Kent later on more information about that? But that is determined definitely during the design phase, although we may have some preliminary information for the outfall locations now.
All right, absolutely. Okay, and we received a comment from Jeff who says he really appreciates our presentation tonight and the work we've done on this project. You have my support, and I'm really excited to see this project move forward as you described. Great job. And again, thanks, Jeff. Thank you. It's always nice to hear that good feedback. We appreciate you for taking time tonight away from your friends and family to hear this presentation and understand what's happening in your community. All right, Marcus, we are receiving some questions about mosquitoes and are those attracted to wet bottoms or what types of basins? Can you talk a little bit about the mosquito issue?
Sure. And before I get into that, I'd also like to thank Jeff as well. The questions from Jim, I think it's Jim R. I won't say your full name, but we appreciate your support. And also Claudette, I'm assuming that's Claudette M. So if that's Claudette M, we thank you as well. You know, we appreciate the support and all the input that you all provide for us, especially in the Cypress Creek watershed. So to answer the question about the mosquitoes, so the way we design our wet bottom basins, we make them deep enough so that they attract things like dragonflies, you have fish, and you know, those natural predators of mosquitoes and mosquito larvae help to eliminate any issue of mosquitoes that we would anticipate by us having a wet bottom basin there. So those things are taken into consideration for our wet bottom detention basins.
All right, thank you. And Marcus, I know you answered the question earlier about the forested buffer on Cypress Creek, but would you share that information again? We're receiving some additional questions.
Yeah, so, you know, as I said earlier, so the primary purpose for that forested buffer is to create a riparian zone. Because we aren't doing any channel improvements on Cypress Creek, if we were to completely clear along the channel like that, it could create a potential destabilization of the banks. And so we didn't want to create that effect along Cypress Creek with all the other, you know, with not being able to do any channel improvements. Also, another benefit of having that riparian barrier is that it could be used for amenities, trails, bike paths, and things like that. I mean, I think there's a location on Cypress Creek that has a Frisbee golf course. So, you know, that riparian buffer and those wooded areas that we provided will allow, there to be some public use to the facility, of course, again, by some other third-party sponsor. Also, along the buffers along Cypress Wood and TC Jester just, gives the neighborhood and the area still that natural feel, because as you're driving down Cypress Wood Drive or driving down TC Jester, you don't see, 30 feet off the edge of the road, a huge hole or detention basin. So, it kind of helps build a natural feel that Cypress Creek has anyway, because it is a natural channel. And, we just want to make sure we take those things into consideration.
And with that, that's the end of our evening. And I'd like to share one final reminder that we are continuing to accept comments and feedback on this project through June 30th. We also encourage everyone to get flood insurance, as flood season in Harris County runs year-round. Thank you again for joining us this evening and for your engagement with this project. We look forward to continuing to share updates as our work